was having a conversation with somebody the other day as they were looking through some of my paintings, and they don't paint themselves, and they asked the question, how do you manage to get that amount of detail into a painting in such a seemingly short space of time that it takes to create them? And so I had to explain to them really that it's an illusion, and it's the illusion of detail. So rather than painting hundreds of twigs and branches and leaves on trees and things like that, that it's a series of shapes and light and dark. And I'm not 100% sure they knew what I was talking about, to be honest with you, but got me thinking, and I thought I'd try and make a video for people over here and explain what I mean and how you can go about this kind of thing. So this is the photo I'm going to work from. Obviously lots of trees, bushes, there's reflections in the river. You could spend hours and hours painting every little thing you see there meticulously, but the style that I like to paint in an impressionistic style, means that you can treat everything as a simple shape and then look at the light and look at the dark and try and work with that to create the illusion of detail. So let's give this a go. So I've wet the paper all over, and I'm going to bring in some blue, bit cobalt, bit of ultramarine. Not much going on in the sky and not much reflection of it down in the water really. It's quite a hazy day, so I'm just going to tint the paper really with this blue. There's a lot going on with the trees and everything, so basic rule of thumb would be, if you've got a lot going on in your land, make your sky very simple. So I'm going to stick to that. So let's drop in a little bit of raw sienna now. So all very dilute at this stage. Really, I'm tinting the paper and then leaving a little passage of light. Let's close that off down towards the bottom there. Soften all the edges, drag it all together, but making sure I do leave that little bit of light there, just left of centre. So that's the sky and the water painted. Okay, I've dried that completely now, so I can work on the land, and I'll work from the furthest distance coming forward. So I'll mix up some blue with a little bit of raw sienna, and there's some trees right off in the distance there, quite dark in the reference, but photos will generally darken the subject anyway, so I know that I can get away with being a little bit lighter in the distance. Drop a little bit more raw sienna in there, a little bit of variation, and just helps to create a sense of light and shadow. So a little bit more raw sienna into that mixture, I can start bringing that shape down. So looking at the overall shape of everything, not painting a tree as such, it's just a little blob at the moment, but that's fine. I'll tie it all together. So working on one big shape, so a little bit more blue. Let's bring a shape across for some more distant trees and give it little spritz as I go as well. Tiniest little touch with a mist bottle. Don't want this to dry out too quickly. So I'm always thinking about just creating that overall illusion that now we've got some distance. So you can achieve that by being blue and or cooler, lighter colours off in the distance, and I can get progressively warmer and darker as I come into the foreground. So there's tops of some trees just left on the left hand side there. I can lay those in with a little bit of raw sienna. And again, looking at the shape, not thinking about painting a tree at all. Also, squinting when I look at the reference gives me a sense of the shape without any of the detail, and that's quite a nice little trick to remember. So let's touch a little bit of Viridian into that mixture now. So make it a little bit greener. Just start bringing this oval shape down towards the middle ground, down towards the edge of the water. So outlining the edge of that bank. And now there are some trees along the bank. I'll add those in a little while when it's a little bit drier. So working my way across, building up this shape and getting a lot of variation in there in terms of colour. Let's get a little bit of ultramarine. I can get some burnt sienna in there now, so I can start adding some slightly darker paint in. Touch some raw sienna into that as well. I can drop a little bit of water in with the mist bottle. Start working on the shape of the larger tree on the left hand side, and I can treat that really pretty much as a silhouette. So I'm going to lay in some lighter elements in there, and I can tie that all together at the end with some darks. So I don't have to copy it exactly either. I don't have to copy everything that I see in the photograph. I can just build up a shape that's roughly the shape I want it to be. Now bring this shape down. I can join that in to the paint I've already got on there. So all the edges are soft and everything's blurred together. Let's lay some more blue in, more raw sienna. And getting variation in the whole time. It's always very tempting if you've got some paint already mixed up to lay the whole shape down using that paint, but don't be lazy. Always add something else in there. Even in a underpainting stage, it's still good to get variation in. So let's lay some paint down into the water as well for the reflection of that tree. Now it's a very dark reflection, but I'm going to lay in the lighter elements, and I can always go across it with some darker paint if I need to. And I'll use that same paint to put in the reflections of those bushes that I've not painted yet. But it's quite nice to get them in at this early stage, building up one big wash and getting as much of the painting down as I can. Now again, the shape of that reflection comes all the way down to the bottom of the painting. I can lay that in as one big blue-grey shape. And I still haven't painted any objects. I've not painted anything at all really. It's all one big blurred together wash. But hopefully once I get those few dark elements in at the end of the painting will be enough to pull it all together and create that illusion that there's lots of little things happening. Let's go back to the old calligraphy brush that I've got, and I can start working on the right hand side now. So a little bit more Viridian, a bit more raw sienna, and there's the bank of the river, and it comes round. So I've got the edge of the water line there, and the bank comes up. And I don't like to paint things as if they're cardboard cutouts, so I'll always tie it in to everything else that's around it. And there's another tree there in the middle ground. So laying in the lighter elements in that. So really just a little bit of raw sienna mixed in with some of the other paint in the palette. Let's go back into the slightly larger brush, and there's some shadow areas that I can lay in. I can bring the shape of this bank round. Now there is some kind of tree or something in the foreground there, but I'm going to ignore that. I'm going to continue the curve of this bank round, and I'll use the reflections to close off that area. I think that's another quite an important thing, really, especially if you're working from a photograph or on location. Really, if something's not matching or not fitting in with the composition that you're trying to make, then you're free to move things around and you can do what you want. So I'll completely remove those trees in the foreground, and like I said, just rely on the reflection. So I go back into that blue grey mixture, and so imagining the reflections of the trees above, bring them straight down. Let's give everything a tiny little spritz as well before it all dries out too much. So really building everything up in this first wash, and I still haven't painted a tree, I haven't painted any objects at all really yet. And so I've been looking at the reference photo, squinting my eyes, looking at the overall shape of everything, and then very quickly making an impression of that on the paper. And so there's hundreds of little leaves and branches and things at the top of this tree, but I don't want to spend an hour putting all of those in individually. I can use my brush, move my brush around very quickly, make lots of little marks, and picking out that overall shape just to create the impression. And now I think we've dried off enough now in the centre there that I can suggest some of the shapes of these bushes. So it's a little bit of raw sienna, a little bit burnt sienna, and just the other paint that's left behind in the palette. Let's touch a little bit more blue into that mixture, make it quite brown. And now I'm getting these slightly darker shapes in, and that's instantly pushed that distance back. So the blue, the tops of those trees off in the distance are instantly pushed back as soon as I get these slightly darker, harder edges in there. Okay, I've dried it off again, so now it's time to start pulling the painting together with some darks. So let's grab some ultramarine and some burnt sienna, and let's mix up a couple of little puddles of some darker paint. And bring in a little bit more water with the mist bottles. Quite warm and dry today, so the paper's drying out fairly quickly. So now I'm looking at the reference and again squinting my eyes, and I can see shapes of the shadows, and there's some darker areas within those trees. And so picking out again just the simple shapes, and then making sure I leave behind little light areas as well. Trying to build that illusion that there's lots of things going on in this area without having to paint anything really. So it's all about light, dark and shapes. And there's a bit of a tree trunk that comes up here, and it's a good idea to get a few little areas, so you don't want everything to be completely blurred. So let's have a little bit of a tree trunk and a few branches, but keep everything else fairly vague. So laying in these darker shadow shapes. I can bring that shape down into the water. Let's swap to the slightly larger brush and get the paint on a little bit quicker. Don't want too many hard edges where these dark shapes meet the water. I want that to kind of blend down and become one. So laying these shapes in very quickly. Working my way over, joining all the darks together from left to right, making little connections everywhere. Bringing all these little dark shapes across, blending left to right, working over the whole sheet pretty much as well, and trying to work quite quickly before everything dries out, so I do have the opportunity to join everything together and make everything kind of soft. So a few little areas of shadow up in that tree. Let's get some more ultramarine, a bit more burnt sienna. Let's get a tiny little bit of viridian in there as well, and a little bit of raw sienna. So I mixed up a very dark green. And let's get some of these strong darks in this tree on the left hand side. Don't want to cover up completely the first wash I've put in as well, so make sure I leave areas of that behind. So working very quickly, very loosely the whole time. Again, tiny little glances at the reference and make a decision very quickly, lay the paint in as quickly as I can really. I mean, obviously if you're painting along yourself, then don't feel like you have to rush. Always work at your own pace. And so if you have to, then pause the video and go back in places. So don't think that you have to try and keep up with me. I do work relatively quickly, especially when doing this kind of thing. But every time I go back, I'm adding something else into the palette. So I'm getting quite dark now, more ultramarine, more burnt sienna. And it's quite dark in the reference photo down in this water area, so I can drag that in very quick, but keep trying to keep everything quite soft. There's lots of water on the paper as well, so hopefully it will dry lighter, and hopefully it would dry with a slightly misty feel to it. I think that would be quite a nice effect. So no real join with these trees and reflections, or in between these trees and reflections I should say. Now mix up some more dark paint. It's a little bit thicker, so it's a little bit drier than what I've already laid in, so I can lay that in on top. It shouldn't run too much. Let's get some strong dark across the riverbank and in those little bushes there. Again, quite thick dark paint now. Trying to find a balance between left and right all the time now. I'm reaching the end of the painting, so trying to make sure everything's balanced. Let's extend these reflections down slightly. A few little ripples across the water as well. Not really a huge amount of that going on in the reference, but I think it's looking a little bit plain down there. So tiny little bit of dry brush across that water surface. Now I was in two minds whether to put in this telegraph pole that's in the reference, but I think I will. I think it'll add a little bit of interest there. And so keeping it in the same style as the rest of the painting, so laid in very quickly and very loosely. Don't have to worry about it being too straight a line or anything like that. Tie that down into the land. Always making sure I've got a connection between left and right. Now picked up some of that blue-grey paint, and I can very lightly, very light touch, lay in some of those telegraph wires. Little broken line always seems to look better than a perfectly straight hard line, so make it a little broken line, little gaps in between here and there. And the same blue-grey paint, and I can bring the reflection down, and that's just a little wavy line there. And a couple of little marks of those little horizontals. But again, treated very simply, don't need to do any more than that. Now, there's a few spots up in the sky that came from my brush, and I can turn those into birds. I could spend a little bit of time removing them with a bit of paper towel and a damp brush, but sometimes they're nice and random little marks, and just by turning it into a bird adds a little bit of interest, especially in a painting like this. And I think we're pretty much done. Before I do, I'll just soften this area on the right hand side. It looked a little bit too hard an edge, so a bit of clean water in there, soften that edge. A couple of tiny little marks across the water. And I think I'll dry that off. Okay, I've dried the painting and I'm fairly happy with it. So it's the finished painting, and it's all about the illusion of detail, like I said. So I haven't really painted any solid objects in this painting at all, apart from the telegraph pole and maybe a couple of those little branches in that tree on the right. Everything else is very vague. It's just shapes with light and dark, so cooler, lighter tones off in the distance, and then getting slightly warmer, a bit darker in the foreground. But that's how you can build up a scene, relatively complex scene with quite a lot going on, and by concentrating on shapes, light and dark, you can piece that together and really create that illusion of detail. So anyway, hope you liked the video. If you did, send me a comment and give the video a like and subscribe and all that kind of stuff if you haven't already. And do check me out on Patreon as well. There's an exclusive video over there every week, and I take requests from people, and you can send me your photos and all that kind of good stuff. And so check that out if you want. But anyway, I'll see you in the next video, and as always, thanks for watching.